それでは次に
Thank you very much. We would now like to take questions from the audience. So we'll first take questions from those of you in the audience, and they will also take questions from people who are connected online, and then come back to questions to people on the site later on. Now, if you're here in the audience, please raise your hand, wait for the microphone to be brought over to you, and state your name and affiliation before you ask your question. So if you have any questions, may I ask you to raise your hands, please? Thank you. Thank you. Let's start with this gentleman. Thank you very much. My name is Kikuchi from SMBC Nikko Securities. I have two questions. Page 11. I'd like to ask about page 11. There are a lot of questions about what's written on page 11. So I would like to ask two questions on page 11. Page 11, please. It's about the GDC financial snapshot page. So with regard to profit, there is no indicator about your profitability. But what about EBITDA or OP? Maybe EBITDA is a better indicator. How do you see the growth rate for EBITDA? What is the growth rate for EBITDA right now? So how profitable are you right now, or against the asset? What is the profitability versus asset, and how is it growing? In the case of NTT Limited, when we take a look at NTT Limited PL, a very simplified information is available in NTT IR information. And we know that the revenue for data centers are increasing, and it looks that it is going to grow further down the road. Now, there is OP information. This contains a lot of cost, I'm sure. But OP doesn't seem to be growing all that much. Now, is data center business really profitable? Is the profit for data center business growing? Do you have any quantitative numbers that you're able to share with us? We want some quantitative information about the growth in the profit for data center business. Thank you. Thank you, Suzuki here. With regard to data center business profit level is concerned, I'm afraid we are not disclosing official numbers with regard to profit per se of data center. But there's one benchmark. Let's say our competition, such as, let's say, the two top competitors. These two top, if you compare with the top two competitors, our profitability is very much in line with the profitability of the top two players in the marketplace. With regard to the growth, in line with the growth in the revenue, I believe our profitability is also enjoying very strong growth. That is all I can say. Thank you. Okay, thank you. That's fine. What about, well, you're going to be increasing investment right now. So and if you want to finance investment through cash flow, that could be very burdensome. Your profitability with regard to PL is in line with your competition. What about return against the asset? What about ROIC? What is the feature of your numbers? What is the feature of your company? With regard to ROIC, again, we cannot share with you concrete numbers. Please understand, we do not disclose those numbers. It is true that with regard to CapEx, we have done a very large-scale CapEx. That is true. Now, this applies to the cash flow. This also applies to the burden on the PL. Yes, there is some pressure on the cash flow as well as on PL. Now, having said all this, we mentioned that our bookings and the sales of data centers is very strong. Ordinarily, in the case of data centers, when services are launched, and this applies to any other operator, including ourselves, but when the services are launched, in the next 3 to 5 years, they try to fulfill the space. That's the plan for various businesses. That is the general plan. But in actuality, the recent situation is this. Even before the completion of the construction of the data centers, we're able to have clients knocking on our doors. So we have use of clients on day one. So as far as usage is concerned, it's improving significantly. So as far as profitability is concerned, with regard to the speed of return, the speed of collecting the return, this investment is increasing, but also our our pace of recruitment of investment is also fast. So I think it is in line. Thank you very much. My second question, if I could turn to my second question. This was in Doug's presentation. Two questions. Let me see. Please. I'll ask in Japanese. It's on page 32. Page 32. Page 32. Now the bookings this year enjoyed strong growth. This also enjoyed strong growth previous year as well. And you're going at 10-fold and 20-fold in certain cases. Was there any special factor? Is it due to a special client? Did you have like one-off large client bookings? Was that the driver for this growth? Or you received bookings from a very large number of clients all at once, suddenly. So compared to 3 or 4, and that's why you're going at 10-fold, 20-fold compared to 3 or 4 years ago. Can you talk about the driver behind this very strong growth? Thank you very much.
So that's a very good question. Thank you. It was driven mostly by a few select set of customers that had a lot of demand. And as I spoke earlier, we retooled the company over the last 5 years to be very enterprise and very hyperscale centric. And so most of that demand was from large enterprise companies and large hyperscale companies. Did that answer your question?
Thank you very much. Okay, I understand. あと2つ目なんです。
My second question. Thank you very much, by the way. So second question. This is on page 33. The next page, page 33. Page 33. You talked about partnership with NTT Data. Now, you mentioned that once you construct, supply cannot keep. Correction. You mentioned the supply cannot keep up with the demand. So, I'm afraid that maybe you have no capacity. Even if you have data partnership with NTT Data, maybe you have no capacity to offer because you're fully booked. So that's my concern. So that's my first point. And also, secondly, this type of partnership with NTT Data. What about the staff and people with experience that are involved in the partnership? So, NTT Limited, do you have a team of people that can actually fully engage in this type of partnership on both sides? Now, of course, we understand that maybe it's a good idea to partner with 2 different companies, but is there capacity and sufficient talent to be able to really implement this partnership? Even now, you try to. I'm sure you mentioned that you're already involved in negotiations, offerings with concrete clients. When will these services be launched? Is it going to start next year, for example? Will this new services based on partnership be available this year or next year? So can you talk about the concrete outlook for your partnership with NTT Data? Thank you very much.
Another very good question, thank you. So I'll start with the first part of the question, which had to do with inventory. Remember, we're a global platform. It's not just the United States. So in the United States, we have less inventory than we do in other parts of the world. But we do always have some level of inventory because we always have customers that are leaving or doing something different. And so there always is a small level of inventory that is available. Most of these fully managed opportunities that we're talking about, the beauty of them is that they don't take large pieces of inventory. What they do is they have advanced managed services and full stack services. So it's usually we're not talking about megawatts. We're not talking about even in half a megawatt. We're usually talking about racks. And so we can almost always find space within our existing data center footprint to accommodate opportunities like this. As far as staff is concerned, the second part of the question, we do have dedicated people on our team that work directly with our brother and sister companies, NTT Limited and NTT Data. And remember, these full stack opportunities are driven by their staff. we're a part of the equation, but they're almost always primary on these opportunities because we're very, very good at data center services. They're very good at implementing complex solutions. And so they're very well staffed in these areas. And I have people on my staff that work jointly with them. In the US, it's 2 dedicated resources, and then they've got part-time resources beneath them. And we've never outstripped those resources. And we land partnership opportunities with our brother and sister companies on a very regular basis. And in most instances, they're very profitable because of that full stack mentality. Hopefully I answered your question. Arigato.
Thank you very much. ありがとうございました。
はい、それでは次のご質問をお受けいた。
Thank you very much. The next question, the person in the very front row, please. Nomura Securities, Masuno speaking. I also have several questions. Firstly, the profit part, page 11, the drawing. The members here need to put together a forecast. So setting aside the current, the contract time period, how long? In the case of hyperscaler, maybe 10 years and then extension 10 years, 20 years. But CapEx depreciation time period, building and servers, maybe servers 4 to 5 years. The building, I would say 20 years for depreciation. Then the break even should be shorter than 3 to 5 years. Is that truly the case? Can you reach break even before 3 to 5 years? I want to hear the profit mechanism of your business. And currently 1,000 megawatt and then 700 megawatt upcoming, which means 70% increase in capacity. The 70%, how long will it take to convert into sales? You will be constructing in 2 to 3 years. But so profitability and growth, these 2 questions I have for you. I would like to respond to your questions. Thank you for your questions. 2 to 3 years may not necessarily mean the payback. I could have misled you. But the customer's contract in itself is different from country to country. But it is true that the customer's contracts tend to be long. Depending on the country, enterprise customers, shortest 3-year contract and renewal every 3 years, or a 5-year contract. So the contract time period is different from country to country. And as Doug explained earlier, the churn, when the renewal timing comes, how much churn is there actually there? In the case of US, only several companies in a year. So once CapEx is made, and because of customers' business reasons, if there is the need to exit, that is a different story. But usually, there is a very long-lasting use of our data center. More than 10 years by one customer. We have many such cases. So inclusive of the full stack services, we will continue to sell and market. And the 700 megawatt part. The 700 megawatt construction is ongoing. This may be some of a repetition, but under the recent situation, 700 megawatt data center, once it is built, in many regions and in many data centers, there are such as anchor tenants. We have customers already available, and once we can start business, customers will immediately start using our services. So in terms of turning into profits, we can have profit in single year basis or turn into profit in the following year. We are able to turn into profits pretty early. This is the case of the business. Allow me to confirm, hyperscalers, they can sign a contract initially 10 years or not? Will they sign a contract for 10 years initially? Depends on the region, but yes, you're right. Basically, 10 years or longer contract. More than 10 years. And then every 5 years, renewal option, for example. Or in other regions, every 5 years, renewal of options. There are different patterns. But you're right. 10 years is the most common pattern. Yes, and then extension would be another 10 years. So first and in second year, you talked about possibly turning into profits. But then you said break even into 3 to 5 years was misleading. This is confusing. Oh, I was confusing with cash flow break even. Break even wise, within 2 to 3 years, almost all data centers turn into profits. You mean on operating profit basis? Yes, operating profit basis turn into profits, operating profit into 2 3 years. Next question, Japan. You are going to accelerate investments in Japan. Currently in Chiba, Equinix and Digital Reality, looking at their investments, there is so much excess of supply and such strong competition. You are avoiding Tokyo, and you said, like in Osaka, and this time you are escaping to Kansai. I think this seems to be the right strategy, but do you intend again to invest in Chiba? By accelerate, do you intend to invest in places like Chiba? Not only hyperscalers, but large-scale clients? Diversification of location is necessary. And Chiba is, I think what you mean by Chiba is Inzai region. In Inzai area, there are several hundred megawatts of supplies coming and continuing. And in this case, in the case of a hyperscaler, if there is more than a certain scale, there is too much concentration in one location. They surely have needs to diversify their locations. That can be in Tsukuba and other locations to diversify into. Therefore, whether NTT will invest in Inzai or not, as of now, as you say, there is already a lot of supply. Thus, instead of Inzai, in NTT in Japan, network connectivity and fiber assets, we are at a strong advantage. In other words, in the US or India, if there is a new market to be created, this is going to be quite challenging if we wanted to create a new market ourselves. But in the case of NTT, we have a lot of fiber assets. We want to use this advantage and create market ourselves. This is the possibility we are thinking of. I understand. Thank you very much. That was clear.
それでは
Then we'll go to the gentleman in the third row. Thank you very much. My name is Ishida from Tokai Tokyo Research Center. I wanted to ask about the data center. You mentioned that the bookings for data center are increasing. But what is the substance or the contents of these data? What are the contents? Is it someone like Netflix? Are we talking about Netflix type of data? What type of data is the core of this growth? What is the core of the data right now? Going forward, what will happen? Do you believe the real-time type of data will be increasing down the road? If that is the case, the customers of your data center business, and the customer allocation may change depending on the change in the substance of the data that you handle. Now, right now in the United States, how do you see the characteristics of the customer profile? When you take a look at the data process, you mentioned that you're number 3 globally. But is there concentration among customers? Do you have customers in the growth sector? That's my first question.
We have customers across all different verticals. Where we're seeing the most growth is what you would expect. It's in cloud computing, it's in AI, it's in analysis, blockchain, things of that nature, IoT. All of those usual suspects is where we're getting much of our business from, I think, globally. We also, at NTT, afford a very strong reputation for operating very high-quality data centers. So we get a lot of financial business, we get a lot of government business, especially in the US. And so I would say we have a very well-diversified portfolio of clients is one of our strengths from a concentration standpoint. As you start to move down and you look at individual regions, of course, there's going to be greater concentration. But when you look at it globally, we have a very well-diversified portfolio. And it is the usual suspects in those growth areas that we're getting, especially in cloud, as everyone's digitizing and moving to the cloud. Did that answer your question?
そうしますと、
Thank you. If that's the case, when you talked about cloud, what about ADAS or ADAS? I think in the United States, it's a car-centric society. So Ford and GM are working together with the government. And you're involved in Las Vegas project, but will that demand increase going forward, do you think? So do you believe that that type of work that type of booking will increase in the United States as well?
So we're already having conversations with car manufacturers about autonomous driving. As you know, we have a smart city project in Las Vegas, which has spurred a bunch of other conversations with other cities. If you think just in our short lives, going back 10 years, the amount of data we used to access on our cell phone was just basically text messaging. Now I can access movies, I can watch Netflix on a plane or connect to just about anywhere. All of that content is really what's driving the explosive growth of the data center industry. And yes, I'm a very strong believer that the autonomous driving and IoT that you're seeing in cities will be deployed across heavy swaths of the globe. A lot of that starts in the US because the US is where the data center industry started. So we're seeing a lot of that activity now, but I think you're seeing some of that in Europe as well. And so that is the primary driver.
ありがとうございます。
Thank you very much. My second question, you talked about hyperscaler. Now, in the past, companies like Intel, they created CPU. Intel cornered the market with CPU, but now recent days, hyperscalers can on their own make their own development. So the added value of semiconductors are now being absorbed by the hyperscalers and the cloud service operators. That, in the case of NTT Group, what is your prospects? You mentioned that you're doing this at a very early phase. You mentioned that you're doing work very quickly. Now, supply chain for semiconductors are problematic. Are you going to be developing your semiconductors on your own? Can you talk about the semiconductors and the supply chain issue? I know the past 2 years have been difficult for your supply chain. What are the prospects for NTT when it comes to this particular question? Yes, you mentioned supply chain, especially semiconductor supply chain. Yes, you're right. The delivery period has become very prolonged with regard to semiconductors, and that has had implications. But what is the impact on data center business? As you pointed out, with regard to data center construction, yes, we need to procure a lot of components and materials. So it is true that there's a risk that the delivery period could be prolonged and that this could lead to delays in the construction. That is a risk. But as was mentioned by Doug Adams earlier, we take the modular approach. First of all, data centers, when they begin constructions, they do UPS and also the air conditioning design, battery design. You actually make procurement with each vendors for each of these materials. But in the case of modular approach, what happens is that in advance, you actually secure materials beforehand. And while procuring materials beforehand, you make sure that you flexibly assign those materials who are needed. So you have a very flexible approach with regard to modular approach. So you talked about the prolonged supply chain. So we have envisioned the prolonged supply chain, and with this as an assumption, we have taken methods to mitigate any impact from the pressure on the supply chain. So we're taking all sorts of measures against this backdrop. So you talked about semiconductor supply chain pressure. Is that affecting the performance? No, that is not the case in our company. Also, with regard to delivery to the customers and with regard to the launch of the data centers, we've not had any significant delays up until now. The case about Intel is separate, but we've never had such major delays in the.
So I'd like to expand just a little bit on this because supply chain, everyone knows, is a global issue that affects all industries. We were very fortunate in a few years ago. We started a process of locking down our designs and standardizing our designs. So each region across the globe has a very standardized, repeatable design. And what that does for us is it allows us to assign primary, secondary, tertiary suppliers to each element of the data center. And then we create framework agreements that are long-term, 3 to 5 year in nature with our supply chain providers. And then we use what's called vendor managed inventory, VMI, to make sure that we have a continuous supply. So I like to say that we manage our infrastructure by maniacally managing the supply chain. We are very, very, very mature and prescribed in how we manage our supply chain. And to date, we've had some small delays, but if a manufacturer can't come through with their framework agreement, we just switch to our secondary or tertiary manufacturer. And we work across the globe to also ensure that have harmony across the equipment that we use. You can't use the same equipment in all areas of the globe because there's difference in voltage between Europe and the US and things like that. But we've got our supply chain down pretty well. And that's a benefit of being such a large company. It's also a benefit of having hyperscalers within our business ecosystem, because the hyperscalers allow us to build at this very, very, very large scale that the small providers cannot build at. And so they're not able to lock up the supply chain like we can. Hopefully that answers your question with a little bit more detail about the construction side.
最後にちょっと確認なんで、
Thank you. Point of clarification with regard to semiconductor. What about the CPU design? CPU design. The hyperscalers are doing CPU design. Does NTT intend to design its CPU? Because this is the core, right? Does NTT intend to internally? NTT cannot or will not do CPU internally. Is that the case? Is that the thinking of NTT? Well, right now, on this matter, of course, we're involved in a lot of R&D. But with regard to business, with regard to making this into business, well, maybe going forward in the future, in relation to the ION concept, maybe white box type of possibility might be there, but with regard to data center business, as a data center business group, we're not aware of such a plan. Thank you. Thank you much. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for all the questions. We have been receiving many, but in the interest of time, many apologies, but we would like to stop questions and answers for now. We would like to conclude the session about the data center now. Thank you very much.